provide this video a very succinct introduction, and just to lay out the context of it, in essence, I got 2 woke females into the band. No, I wasn't bothered about their political stance, but the producer that I have been working with has a difference of opinion to them, and he makes it vocal on social media and through other mediums. And they took great umbrage to that because he's not ideologically conforming. So I wasn't going to do a video on this, but it's very germane to my previous videos that I've done on ideology, and it provides you a real life example of this snare of ideology in action. So in essence, as I stated, this gets into the idea, the Spinozan idea of all determinate is a product of negation. And I'm going to get into that in other videos, or I may actually include it in the Black Star video. Yeah, actually I will include it in the Bowie's Black Star analysis video. So I just wish to speak about a situation that occurred yesterday. So we got a female vocalist and a female bassist into the band. Now, of course, they're fairly left-wing, one could say. I mean, I wouldn't call it left-wing, but I guess in the modern parlance, it would be classified as left-wing. So they're extremely, quote-quote, woke, right? They're ideologues, which didn't really bother me. However, we were working with this producer. I've worked with him for about 7 years. I mean, not just professionally, I personally know him. I have a friendship with him. Very sound guy. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with everything he says. And he posts up things to Facebook that obviously they classified as transphobic and other things such as that. Now, I mean, I don't really, especially working in the music scene and just generally, right, because I'm not an intellectual adolescent, I know you can't control people. And I'm certainly not that sort of religious or zealot type that believes they can control people or wants to control people, right? I know 9 times out of 10 you cannot persuade anyone to change their position on something. Again, you can only have a rational debate with them, and hopefully the mimetic seeds have been planted in their mind if you wanted to change their opinion, right, in the long term. However, the ideologies that we have now, which are replete within society, and again, all ideologies, all religions, they create that certain archetype that is narcissistic, that is a control freak, because that and is self-righteous, of course. And that is how you, in essence, get, what you can only describe as ideological zealots, fanatics. What one can only describe as intolerant fanatics, right? That if you express any derision for any of the ideological tenets, right? This conglomeration of ideas that you have to wholeheartedly believe, like the fanatic, or you're otherwise ostracized. If you don't show total loyalty, pay homage to that, then they will go after you, right? They will have a bloodlust for you. So anyway, we were in a writing session. It was just me and the bassist, this female bassist. She's the newest addition. She is the most, left-wing of the two. And, well, anyway, the producer, they took great umbrage to what he was posting. Okay, fair enough. And I attempted to accommodate that by changing producer. Now, again, I told our previous producer, the one that they called transphobic, the one that I've had about a 7-year friendship with, personally and professionally. And the individual could have took it very badly, the producer, but luckily he was quite amicable about it. Anyway, so I've done all this. The bassist, she was a 4th year psychology student. Well, She did social sciences previously, so I mean, that explains a lot. Queer studies and all of that. So I, a straight white male, and we'll get to that, and a lowly construction labourer, helped her with her last essay for her 4th year, right? Her final year of university, a psychology essay. It was about artificial neural networks and the Euler-Eichenbaum machine, again to do with artificial neural networks. It was about a 2,000 word essay. I ended up writing about 600 words, which I'm not great at maths, but I assume that's around about a quarter. So I wrote around about a quarter of that essay for her, which didn't really bother me because, I'm going to reuse all of that for my own book. Now, so I've done all of this, helped her out. I've helped the vocalist out as well. I paid a few of her parking tickets because she was dealing with money worries. She was going through a breakup. She was dealing with money worries. So I've done everything to accommodate these two. And, throughout the ensuing 2 months or so they've been in the band, so I even accommodated them with this producer as well, that they didn't like. They had an ideological difference with him, so they didn't want, the bassist flat out refused to work with him anymore because she called him a transphobe. So I changed producer to a more expensive producer, which in terms of time and such, and I mean the time it takes for him to finish a track, I mean it's less efficient than the previous producer we were using, the supposed alleged transphobe. Well, anyway, she mentioned, what did you say to him yesterday at the writing session? The bassist asked me. I just told her, what was said and what have you. And then she made a comment regarding him, and I stated, well, I'm still going to hang out with him. I'm still going to talk to him. I don't really see it as a moral issue. I see it as an ideological difference you have with him. And he's really not that bad a person. If you get beyond the difference of opinion you have with him, you'll be able to empathise, you'll be able to see his humanity beyond the lens of ideology. And she took umbrage at that, and then she mentioned, well, you are a straight white male. Now again, this is a discussion about gender. It's not really a discussion. She has a bone of contention with the producer regarding an issue of gender. I don't know where my race fits into it, unless she has a misconception that white people can't empathise, that white people are inherently evil. That's what she's implicitly saying there. So obviously it was racial abuse. So she says, you're a straight white male. These issues don't really affect you. And I stated to her, well, I would still take a position against slavery, even though in the official historical sense, right, the history that's now presented to us, that wouldn't have affected me. So I can have a moral or principled position, no matter if I'm a part of that group being affected by the injustice or not. And I have the capacity for empathy, which she is implicitly stating that I do not. That I am somehow evil, that I am heartless, that I do not care, that I'm not moral, that I am merely looking out for myself, I'm self-centered. That's what she's implying with that type of statement. Now, of course, she's not mature enough to understand that intellectually or otherwise. And I say she's not mature enough, she's 22 years old and she's been through 4 years of university. Now, I've never been through university, right? I've done 1 year of college. Well, tell a lie, sorry, I've done 2 years of college on 2 different courses. So I have no academic background other than what I've sort of picked up here and there. So naturally, I don't have this profound cultured worldview, this ideological slant where one can conflate race and gender. Now again, this is an extension of intersectional theory, which itself is totally flawed. It's it's a racist theory, right? And what she espoused to me was racial abuse at that point. They've been mentioning this white male thing incessantly. And, you know, we were hanging out a few weeks back now, and they mentioned white males are very privileged and they don't understand microaggressions. Now, they got sort of annoyed with me because I stated, well, if white males are so racist, why... Now, again, I don't subscribe to this idea of white and black, and I'll get on to that, what I mentioned to her, and that was what really sent her over the edge, that and another thing, but I'll get to that. I stated, if white males are so racist, why would you be looking at microaggressions? Would you not take the macro if they are inherently and, you know, if they're intrinsically racist, if they are outwardly exuding racism? Would it not be the macro aggressions that you take into account? That stumped them because they're using these terms, these learned terms, but they don't understand really, firstly, what the term's implying, and secondly, the flawed foundation on which the term sits, right? And furthermore, the irony of this is, I was paying for everything in the band. Now, I work 10 hours. I'm not in work currently, but usually, now if that happens a lot, by the way, that I'm out of work for maybe 2-3 weeks. So I have to save my money like crazy, right? And so I'm working on a construction site from anywhere between 40 to 50 hours per week, right? Depending on the contract. I make below the average rate for my profession, which is steel fixing, or in America it would be rod busting, or in Canada it would be placers. So steel reinforcement, that's what I'm dealing with. Most of the sites we go on, we're up to our neck in, you know, rat piss, mud, shit. You know, it's not great conditions on a lot of the sites, and I'm out in all extreme weathers, which doesn't bother me, to be perfectly honest with you. But what bothers me is these two are mentioning that I'm privileged when the vocalist doesn't have a job. She's, in essence, financed by her white male, or straight white male boyfriend, who, by the way, she broke up with, and I mean, she was just totally vilifying him, the way she was describing him to us. And I was thinking, oh God, this guy must be, you know, an absolute monster. And then I met him, and he was so really timid guy, really sound, you know, would do anything for you. And yeah, she was mentioning, yeah, I've got back with him because, well, firstly, she just isn't mentioning the real reason. It's because she has no employable skills. She was previously, before the band, she was an OnlyFans model. And this guy stayed with her through all of that. And she obviously needs a place to stay, right? She needs some of that, you know, straight white male sugar daddy welfare payment. Again, because she's privileged, so she doesn't work. She gets everything handed to her. I'm paying for everything in the band, right? She paid for nothing, and I'm putting her front and centre out there as the front woman of the band, paying for everything. Supposedly I'm privileged though. And then the bassist, her mother and father pay for everything. She doesn't work. She stays up to 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And then when we're at band practice, which I'm paying for, none of them are paying for it. She was just messing around. She's totally not focused at all. You had to, you almost felt like a babysitter. You had to say, right, okay, can we go on with the set now? Can we practice the set? Can we write this song? You know, focus. And supposedly I'm privileged. So going on with the situation in the writing session yesterday, with, you know, that awkwardness, and then her taking umbrage to my difference of opinion. She mentioned about the white straight male thing, and I stated, where does race come into it? We're talking about an issue of gender and all of this. She didn't really say anything, but she reiterated it. Well, you're a white straight male, so it doesn't affect you. And I stated, white and black do not exist. I said, show me the demarcation point between white and black. Are we going to get the Dulux colour chart out? It doesn't exist. Where does someone stop being white and become black and vice versa? I've known one Iranian slash Afghani, you know, he stayed in both countries. And I've known one Algerian and a few Turks, right? Oh, and an Albanian as well, which I still talk to here. They are all fair complexion, right? There's some Scots people, because they travel to Spain and other Mediterranean countries, that would be darker than them visually. So where do we demarcate white and black, right? So everything else is a spectrum to these people, but when it comes to race, for really the purposes, the tacit purpose of hatred, it then becomes a polarity. It becomes a binary, white and black, which is just totally hypocritical. Now, funnily enough, she stated to me that this is the basis. This is later after I ejected her from the band. Again, because I have zero tolerance for any sort of racial abuse or sexism or anything like that to any member of the band. She stated that I was ignorant and hypocritical, right? Total insanity. She didn't want to admit that she was wrong because she's privileged. And she's never had to self-reflect, nor has she ever been challenged on these opinions, because she's existed for 4 years in the echo chamber of university, right? So, yeah, I said, are we going to get the Dulux colour chart out? And she said, well, what are you trying to say, that blue doesn't exist? I said, no, absolutely not. But we're not talking about blue here. I said, we're talking about shades, right? Something is either white or black. That is an absolute, right? Unlike blue, which, of course, as you can see on the visible light spectrum, it has a spectrum in and of itself. You can have light blue, dark blue, all different hues of blue. However, we're dealing with white and black. There is no differentiation, variety within white and black. They're absolutes, right? They're shades. They're absolute shades. So it's an inaccurate way to discuss complexions that are within the human species on a spectrum. They're multivariate. I also stated as well that it would be different if this individual was going off Facebook, right, or social media or wherever he's posting this, and was physically attacking other groups because of their difference. And then she was going to mention, I knew what she was going to mention, and this is what sealed the deal for me, understanding that she was a total fanatic. And I said, no, I'm going to stop you there. I said, speech is not violence. Speech is not violence, right? You cannot state that speech is violence, because it's not. The etymology of violence also really proves this too. So it derives from the Latin violentia, related to the adjective violentus. Its root is vis or vis, which is force, or where we also get our word vigor from, right? So it has to be force. But the Indo-European root of it is vea, which alludes to the desire to take something with, again, force, tenacity, vigor, to be aggressive in exercise and force. That is violence, right? Words do not fit that definition, again, unless with like coercion, you have the threat, or the threat to incite violence upon the person, right? Now, if the words alone were violence, why would we call it an incitement to violence? Because the speaking itself, would that not be the violent act? If words were violence, if speech was violence, words cannot directly inflict harm, which is the definition of assault. An incitement to violence is a direct call for it. Something that will directly result in violence, not stochastically result in violence, or indirectly result in violence somewhere down the line. So I mentioned this. She then shut up. She went, totally indignant. Her face said it all. And she went on her phone, and I could see she's typing to the vocalist. And her and the vocalist have become, sort of besties. And some of the things they've been mentioning in the practice and in the studio, I was totally mortified. So the bassist identifies as bisexual, and they also identify as having neurodivergency, because again, they're narcissists, right? And they have this sort of bombastic, it's totally phony, bombastic, boisterous, God, I can't even think of adjectives to describe it fully. It's that sort of narcissistic, Hollywood-like, self-righteous, celebrity, that sort of vain attitude and accent and the way they carry themselves, right? Purely privileged behaviour, right? They exhibit that totally. It's just so, oh my God, it's so nauseating, so obnoxious. But I was willing to put up with it because, I understand these people are victims. I know it's crazy to think, but this supposed white straight male, which I don't subscribe to, has empathy, right? Anyway, in the studio and in the practice, so the bassist is supposedly bisexual, as I've mentioned. The vocalist was also mentioning how she wants to sleep with a girl, and they were going on, it was a sort of this really creepy sort of lesbian thing, right? Which I don't really care if they're lesbians, but when they're mentioning about, the ins and outs of lesbian sex and what they're going to do to each other and things such as that in the practice room, that's just not socially appropriate. It'd be the same if people were heterosexual and mentioning that within the practice room. There's a time and place. You do not, I don't want to hear that. Well, funnily enough, she mentioned as well, after I ejected her from the band, that it was very unprofessional the way you handled all this, to me, the bassist did. And you're just thinking, really? I'm unprofessional? Again, these people don't have any degree of self-reflection. Have no degree of self-reflection whatsoever. And I mentioned to her, I don't necessarily agree with what the individual posts, our producer posts up on Facebook, right? But that is his right to do that. You have to see beyond his opinions, right? His opinions are not his political uniform. And these people, because they're bigots, essentially, they're what society really would classify as virtuous bigots. They cannot separate one's characteristics from the content of their character. They think the two are completely interwoven, right? So they are actually racist. So they believe because I'm white, as she implicitly stated, well, you're a white straight male. So they believe because I'm white that affects my capacity for empathy. So they believe that empathy is racially based. What do you call that other than bigotry, right? It shows you what individuals who have came out of university are like. And I just want to say this. So I stated, hey, I've just spoken. So this is the vocalist messaging me. Hey, I've just spoken to the bassist and I hear things were a bit awkward today. What happened? I says, hey, to the vocalist, I hope you're well, and, she went to a festival. She can't afford anything in the band. And I'm sitting in, pretty much my four-wall domestic cell, attempting to write songs and network and, propel the band forth while she's, living it up down at a festival. So she couldn't afford, the music video, the production of the song, the PR promotion of the song, by the way. She couldn't afford any of that, but she can afford tickets to a festival for her and her friend. Unfortunately, it did not go that well with the bassist tonight at the writing session. She asked about what I said to the producer regarding not using him anymore and such, and so I told her. However, since I have had about a 7-year friendship and professional dealings with the producer, I believe I simply stated that, quote, the producer isn't such a bad person. You merely have a difference of opinion with him, unquote, or words to that effect. I then stated that I would still talk to the producer, but I respect her opinion on him and such, and she has the right to have that opinion, and I will attempt to accommodate that. She seemed to take great umbrage to this, that I was still talking to the producer, out with the band, and even in a capacity of friendship. She seemed to take great umbrage to this and looked indignant of that fact. Additionally, she also got more indignant when I expressed a slight difference of opinion to her, and naturally, I took offence to her stating that because she believes me to be a, quote, white straight male, quote, I do not subscribe to that identity she placed on me. I should not, therefore, have an opinion on the producer because what he says, quote, does not affect me, unquote. Cutting a long story short, I mentioned that I see what the producer says and the bassist's opinion of it as an ideological difference. I don't moralise the issue, meaning that I do not see him as less than human because he expresses a controversial opinion that I, as well, would not specifically agree with or utter. Likewise, if I disagreed with the bassist, I would still respect her right to have an opinion, and I would still respect her as a human being. She then proceeded to state again, quote, well, you're a straight white male, and so it doesn't affect you, unquote. Personally and professionally in the band, no one will be implicitly or otherwise verbally demeaned or disabused of an opinion because of congenital characteristics that they had no control over at the point of birth. Now, I respect her opinion of the producer. She has the right to have that opinion, and I have accommodated it, but I will not be demeaned because of, as mentioned, these congenital characteristics I had no choice in at birth. In essence, I will not stand for racial and sexist abuse against members of the band, or the disabusing of the right for them to have an opinion because of these said characteristics. Moreover, troublingly, I then apologised if my difference of opinion had offended her. Now do bear in mind I was extremely polite throughout this brief conversation, and never once did I, in return, of course, verbally demean her based on congenital characteristics, though she obviously did with me. Such a thing is immoral, obviously. However, she then stated that, quote, now, when she came back in, she went out to get some air because she was totally, you could just see she wasn't talking to me. It was totally awkward. She, what we call in Scotland, the sort of idiom, she spat the dummy out, right? She threw the toys out of the pram and she wasn't talking to me. Again, because I expressed a slight difference of opinion to her conglomeration of ideas that she believes in within her cult, her ideology, right? She's a fanatic. This is total fanaticism. And at that point, she believed I was immoral, evil, unworthy of any attention. Again, like what cult members do, like what a religious member may do, a fanatical religious member. I apologised to her if she was offended. That's what I did. She came in because I'm polite, right? Quote, because I'm trying to be polite, I'm trying to be cordial and sort of smooth things over because we do have a difference of opinion. And I can see she's offended by that. Quote, are you apologising for, and this is what she stated in response, quote, are you apologising for me being offended, or are you apologising for what you said? Now, what she meant by that is she wants me to apologise for what I said. She wants me to apologise and pay homage to the ideology, to the cult, and to once again venerate the ideological tenets wholeheartedly, to pay homage to them, right? So she's looking for ideological conformity. She's not looking, for cordiality, for remedying our difference of opinion, right? I then now again, I've just been racially abused here. I shouldn't have really even apologised for offending her because she offended me. But this is how privileged she is. This is how entitled she is, right? They're all little entitled princesses. And I have to admit, there's a distinct part of me that I cannot wait for when this collapse comes and these faux sophisticants, cosmopolitan, or, ostensibly cosmopolitan individuals, right, these husks in human form, when they're faced with the consequences of their misguided idealism and ideology, when they see the consequences of it, where they reap what they sow. I see these people as victims, yes, I have empathy to a degree, but when I'm being racially abused for an issue on gender, I draw the line at that. And I don't accept any racial abuse at all, whether it be against any complexion, any shade or hue of skin. I don't agree with that, right? People that have congenital characteristics that they had no choice in at birth, you cannot demean them, right? And what I mean by that is you can't use that to then state, well, the content of your character is like this. That you have this capacity of emotionality or empathy because of this characteristic, right? You can't insult them as well. The thing is, she cannot separate the group and the individual. She has a collectivist mindset, a group mentality, and everyone is a minority because everyone really is, though we are a fractality, we are unique, right? We are a reconfiguration of that pure potential. And each configuration, each reconfiguration is unique, right? In that regard. So we are all minorities. Every individual is a minority. We're equal minorities within our individuality. Now, these people don't see that because this is the thing. They use identity to, ironically, individually empower them, which it doesn't, but they falsely believe it does. Yet, it really only brings them in to a collectivized mentality and a collectivized structure that has been entirely created for them, right? An identity that has been created for them. I hope that makes sense. There's so much to unpack just with this, but I'll continue. I then stated to her, I will not apologise because I have a difference of opinion from you. And I stated, essentially, I cannot work with her in the band, and I do not stand for being racially or sexistly attacked because of my congenital characteristics or how she perceives them. It's abhorrent and medieval behaviour, and I cannot help who I am or how I look or how she believes I look or what she believes I am. Thus, I'm afraid I will have to let her know that she is being ejected from the band because of this egregious and uncivilized behaviour. I have zero tolerance for any racism or sexism of any skin complexion or gender. That does not occur in the band, and it is inappropriate in any social setting. And then the vocalist reacted to this message with an angry face. Now, her and the bassist, because they share the same sort of ideological frame. They hate men, essentially, specifically white males. They hate them. They've mentioned in my presence and in her boyfriend's presence that they hate white males, even though everything they use, all of the buildings they're in, all that's being paid for them really is being done by white males. I mean, the irony is baffling. I mean, even the bassist, she's being funded by a white male, her father, and, well, her white mother too, which both of those people are white. So it's what I stated within my first book. This is what happens at the end of civilizations. You have oikophobia, which is a hatred or an irrational fear of one's own country or countrymen. So, I mean, that occurs at the end of every civilization. And believe you me, when you start to see that, you're not far off from the collapse. Really, the collapse has already occurred within the mind. The externalization of that said collapse, which is internally contained within the mind, it's awaiting its sort of gradual implementation and within the outside environment. So she put an angry face to that, right? Now, I've just been racially abused. Now, I've also been sexistly abused, but I mean, the racial abuse, that's, you think she would be against that. And she stated, "I have no words, Silas," to me. This is the vocalist. And I stated I was likewise with her reaction and comments to me. "I won't be verbally abused or demeaned like that. I understand the position you're in, given that you were building a strong friendship with the bassist. Therefore, are you still happy to go ahead as a member of the band? Just let me know." Now remember, she's racially and sexistly abused me in the past as well. And she's also demeaned me at band practice, right? But again, I'm willing to sort of shrug that off because I have patience, empathy. I understand, firstly, she's impressionable. She's an idiot, really. The strongest sense of the word. She's an idiot. And she probably has other issues that she's dealt with in her childhood that I don't know about, that may affect her and skew or colour her idea of men or white males or something like that, right? So she stated, "Silas, I need time to process this." And then she stated, "I can't get behind this ousting of the bassist because she racially and sexistly verbally abused me without there being a conversation." And I stated the point of contention between the producer and the bassist was on the producer allegedly being a transphobe, right? Now I say allegedly because he hasn't been convicted of that. Now again, that's a crime. That would be a crime within Scots law. He has not been convicted of that, right? I then broke a 7-year relationship with the producer, which could have gone badly for me and the single. We're doing a single, by the way. And by the way, I've paid for the single and it's her song, right? I put the music, I structured, produced it all to her lyrics, right? And she's at the fore of that song, which I've done a lot of work to, and I paid an extra £40 to the producer, just as a thank you, because I was going in constantly trying to make this song sound not boring because there wasn't enough dynamic range within her vocal melodies or the lyrical structure really for me to work with. She was unwilling to change the song, right? And she's singing throughout the song, so there's no dead space, there's no instrumental bits. There's nothing to break up, to texturize the song. So it's very boring. I went in 7 or 8 times, just putting really obscure instruments, because I have a MIDI controller. I was putting really obscure instruments, EBO, other things as well. Just lead parts to try and buttress the song to keep the audience, the listener, engaged. And so that's down the drain now, right? And that could have went badly for me when I said to the producer that the bassist, we can't use you anymore because the bassist doesn't like your views. And that was all to accommodate the bassist. I was also prepared to spend more money on a more expensive producer to also accommodate her. But I draw the line at racial abuse, right? My patience can only go so far. So how does my complexion, being supposedly, which I do not subscribe to, white, factor into any of the bassist's grievances with the producer? I do not tolerate racial abuse, implicit or otherwise. There is no conversation to be had, really. I have zero tolerance for that, and I imagine you would have the same mindset. This is to the vocalist. I said, let me know if you're happy to go ahead without the bassist. I said, we can always get a new bassist. And she stated, I have so many issues with this situation and I simply cannot untangle them in order to explain. The fact you can state that the bassist is simply being accommodated. Now again, she is being accommodated because she's verbally abused me on several occasions. Frequently so. And that we can always get a new bassist shows just how disposable both the bassist and I are. So I replied back. Now remember, she's done 2 songs. This vocalist has done 2 songs with this producer already. She's added him on Facebook, right? She was happy to do more songs with him before the bassist kicked up a fuss about it. I stated, why were you happy to go there and do 2 songs before the bassist arrived then? Again, because she's a hypocrite, right? However, I see you have no problem with racial abuse of band members, which shows how disposable my well-being is to you. Because I'm a man, right? She doesn't care. Because I'm a white, straight male, what she describes as. Again, this is all, supposedly these things are all social constructs, right? But she can look at me and then define me as white, straight and male, which again, I don't identify as, so she's misidentified me. And she's also misgendered me. How do you know I'm male? What is a male? Define male. We can't define female, so can we define male? Right? If all of these things are social constructs, if they're whimsical, if you can change between them at a whim, it means they're fluid, right? If something's fluid, it means it has no determinate definition. That which is without definition, without a determinate definition, it's a non-concept. It doesn't exist. It's totally relative to one's subjective experience, which, you know, to be fair, I mean, there is a spectrum of subjectivity when it comes to concepts, language, and what have you. But we have a broad category of terms, especially in academia, because it's of vital importance when you're discussing any scholarly topic that you have your terms defined, the jargon, the terminology you're using is well defined. And that's one thing, by the way. See, this idea of Western sexuality doesn't exist. You look up in any academic textbook that discusses sexuality in the sociological context, you'll find varying and imprecise definitions. Some reference the preference, one's own preference sexually. Others define it as the way one expresses themselves sexually. Now, I don't know about you, I've expressed myself through creativity. I've even expressed myself through art, words as well, of course, writing. If one is expressing themselves sexually, then what that is implicitly stating, right? And it is implicitly stating this, if you think about it, that sex is purely recreational. You're in essence seeing the sexual act as not a pair bonding experience, but as a way for the atomized individual to revel within pleasure, momentary pleasure, right? So in essence, the other party within the sexual act, the partner, is at that point merely a medium, a canvas for you to express yourself sexually upon, right? That they're nothing. They're really a sex doll at that point. So that's what that's implicitly stating. But this is what these weird Western notions of human sexuality are about. And this is the problem when you get the modern academic, especially those in social sciences, the science which isn't actually a science, looking back in history and overlaying this utterly flawed and imprecise, nebulous concept of Western sexuality onto Roman emperors or people within antiquity. This idea of even homosexuality or transgenderism or transsexualism, really, you could only define it as cross-dressing within antiquity. And anything regarding sexuality, they did not have the same notions of sexuality as we do. They would, as most human society sees it as, you would either take the passive or dominant or active role within the sexual act, right? But the way they view sexuality, the way they view the sex act, is that it is between two parties. It's an act of not just procreation, but of relationship building, right? It's pair bonding. Western sexuality does not have that same definition, that same ethos. The way sexuality is defined within Western social sciences is, and I mean, of course, that's trickled out into the society in general. It's a myth. It doesn't exist. It's a flawed concept. It's a concept even without a foundation, right? As I've stated, it has a totally imprecise definition. So this idea of being straight or gay, it doesn't exist. You're not born with a sexuality. Really, there's a large part of it, of course, it's hormonally dictated, but there's a large part of it which is environmentally dictated, right? We can see that via the upsurge in people self-describing as homosexuals or people self-describing nowadays as transgender or what have you. And that corresponds with the dramatic increase in media and educational-driven conditioning of the populace. And this flawed Western, I hate even saying Western because it's not really, this flawed postmodern idea and even modern idea of sexuality, right? Again, just to be precise, in the Western academic context, it's leading to socially destructive messaging, and it's leading to socially destructive cultural paths, again, such as paedophilia, right? And a normalization of that and a decriminalization of that eventually, right? What are now being referred to as MAPs. Well, that's just a sexuality, like every other one. It's a preference. These people have the right, because everyone has the right to express themselves. You see it in the First Amendment and all of these various bills of rights. So therefore, if sexuality is an expression of oneself and one has the right to expression, right? Do you see where this is going? So it's a weaponization of language. Expression derives etymologically from the Latin expressus, which means to literally properly articulate oneself. You can't articulate yourself through sex. The concept is totally backwards. It's born from a perversion of not only the Romance languages, but also of the English language, which is a sort of hybrid of the Romance and Germanic languages. So I mean, this is a perversion of language, a weaponization of it, a total contortion of the linguistic landscape of the English language, to thus, firstly, weaponize our own rights against us and our children, and to secondly, nullify any arguable resistance that we may have had to it. But the problem is, because you have these various mantras like love is love, which is what religions and cults do to really bypass the population's faculties of reason. And furthermore as well, a lot of these concepts, or social messaging rather, and the mantras that go along with them, love is love for example, or my body, my choice and things such as that, they come from a position of what would seem to be an unarguable premise, right? So who wouldn't be for equality or things such as that? Who wouldn't be for, well, it's your body, it's your choice, right? Who wouldn't be for, well, let's spread love, right? And happiness and whatever. It's the same idea with, happiness and the old sense of that word beginning with G, right? It's a weaponization of language. It's an inversion of its meaning. It's to thus trick people, fool people, right? When you bring in any form of despotism, any form of evil, any form of perfidiousness, you don't do it goose-stepping down the street, right? You do it through pretty colours. You do it through dumbing down the populace and then providing them puerile or infantile mantras and colourful messaging, colourful posters, colourful iconography to back up the new religion, the new state-sanctioned and state-championed belief system, right? And of course, once you've built that body of fanatics through all of this coercive and covert conditioning, then people don't mind attacking, killing the dissident. And this is another thing you do. You can't meet on a level playing field the opposition because, again, you're coming from what really one would believe is an unarguable premise, but it's extremely easy to rationally deconstruct once you understand how psychopaths and emotional manipulation works, even in the most basic sense. You then have to pathologize the opposition. You have to state that they have an irrational fear, right? You have to state that they are something akin to the anti-Christ, right? Could be anti-whatever, because it sounds villainous, right? So you vilify the opposition. It's a complex, or not so complex, ad hominem attack. And we're going to get into that. The way the vocalist stated that it was me that was actually the sexist. I'm the sexist, right? It's extremely manipulative behaviour. And I believe she even put up a post subtly stating that I am the narcissist as well, even though she narcissistically speaks about herself all day. And furthermore, she did OnlyFans, and she posts both TikTok and Snapchat short form videos regarding her and how she is and how great her life is in the most cringe-inducing accent known to the human species. Yes, it's insane, the lack of self-reflection, but that's something we see with people who are dumbed down, who are stupid, who may not have naturally a low IQ, but through environmental conditions, they have developed that low IQ, and it doesn't take a lot. I mean, short form videos are quite effective in lowering one's relational memory, so pattern recognition, and also one's general memory, right, in terms of knowledge, information retained, and even the ability to retain information in the future and to recall it. So it really impedes one's ability to gain knowledge, to gain wisdom, and to gain an understanding of their environment. Indeed, people aren't really looking up anymore. They're zombies glued to their blue screens of spiritual and intellectual death. So therefore, what ends up happening is you get a husk in human form. That's the best way to describe it. A literal fanatic, a plastic man that is malleable, that can be, wound up and then sent in whatever direction to take out the dissident and to protect the corporate structure, which provides it short-form videos on TikTok, right? TikTok until the collapse. TikTok until your career of consuming mindless entertainment ends, right? It's akin to what we see within the Odyssey, Homer's The Odyssey. The idea of the lotus eaters, right? Where you become mindless, you eat the lotus, you become mindless, you lose track of time. And before you know it, your life is over, right? Digressing. Western sexuality, as it exists today, it's just being used as an identity, right? As an extension of this identitarianism, but it actually has no basis within nature, right? It's a totally flawed concept. It's a flawed word. Has no definition, or the definition is so nebulous that it might as well have no definition, right? It literally is a social construct, constructed and weaponized, of course, within the maniacal mind of Western academic social sciences, right? Digressing again, yeah, everything else is fluid, but when it comes to white, straight and male, they can look at me and then just define me as white, straight and male, right? It's a total flaw with their ideology. That's why she stopped talking to me, the basis, when we were in that situation, that conversation. She stopped talking to me, she just went on her phone, and she just looked indignant, because she knows how stupid these opinions are, and she knows she can't defend them, because she's been living for 4 years in an academic, quote, quote, academic, right, falsely so, academic echo chamber. She's not been challenged on these beliefs. She's surrounded by other lemmings that just want to jump off the edge of the precipice, that want to, progress off the edge of the precipice through their progressivism, which it really isn't progressivism. That is pure regression of any enlightenment values, of any human development, both morally, intellectually. I mean, where do they think that's going to lead to? This implicit and really direct now vilification of white straight males is being the root of the problem of everything within society. Where does that lead to? Or any of those characteristics, which these two are white, right? I mean, they are actually white and privileged, as opposed to me. I'm working class. I've had to work for everything that I own, right? I was given nothing on a silver platter. The vocalist is a single child, and the bassist is funded by her parents. Both are middle class. But the way they act, so for example, the vocalist and her boyfriend that she broke up with and got back together again with, he's very timid. She is the exact opposite. She wears the trousers in the relationship, so to say. And it's a total inversion in the way, for example, the bassist dresses as well. Now, of course, she dresses like a tomboy, but I mean, the way she acts as well isn't womanly, right? They're very sarcastic and what have you. So that is at the core of what we see within the wider society in general, and what is being propagandized to young people, which is an inversion of male and female. And of course that has many knock-on effects. One is you become unattractive to the opposite sex, right? So you don't produce children. Furthermore as well, that breaks down family units, which permits this sort of soft landing strategy for the establishment in transitioning towards a system of a non-family system, if you will, a system where there are artificial batteries, large batteries of artificial wombs creating synthetic humans, right? A totally contrived species, contrived within the laboratory. So no parents other than the state, total monopoly. So again, it's paving the way for that. The youth don't understand this, right? Don't get me wrong, I don't expect them to, say, do what the people that are watching this video have done, for years. Look into all of this. Look into the nefarious and dark dealings of the government and the ones behind them, right? I don't expect people in the youth to do that. And of course, the system don't expect that either, which is why they can get away with all of this without even the slightest ounce of resistance from the wider populace. They don't understand, but they're like lab rats. They're being funneled down certain paths. And it's really these individuals are going to, I know it seems all happy and nice and they feel really liberal right now and they feel empowered and all of that. It's almost like reverse psychology in many ways. You make the individual feel empowered while you're controlling them via a contrived identity that's also weaponized, which will eventually lead to their utter disempowerment, meaning that they won't even be alive, really. I mean, they actively want the abolishment of women, right? The system actively want that because women have the ability to produce children, right? They have the ability to produce warriors as well. So in that respect, if you look at it in a militaristic manner, which the state do, women, especially if they're dissidents and the husband is a dissident, or the father rather, then the womb is a barrack, right? And in a system where you cannot have even the slightest distribution of military power, which of course is inextricably linked to political power, you cannot have females having wombs that are active, right? That have the ability to produce life. Because then you do not have a monopoly over life and death and also of all military power. So you need to abolish women, right? That's what the state have to do. That's what they're going to do, and that's what they're doing right now, and they've been doing that since pretty much the 60s, even previously. I mean, we could say it really got off the ground when the pill came out, right? That was the first stage of transhumanism, because women at that point, and the state, vicariously essentially, could control the natural cycles of women, right? Thus they could control demography, and they could control, in an indirect manner, though in future it will be more direct, they could control the wombs of women while making the women believe that they are in control of their own wombs and cycles. So it's this idea of using false empowerment as a way of indirect control. It's the same thing with bringing women into the workplace. You make them believe that, oh, you're equal to men now, you're a valuable member of society and you're producing and such. But really what you're doing is bringing them into the same system of wage slavery. Women are the most important and integral part of a civilization. You mess with their minds, you mess with the cycles of fertility, you mess with their fecundity, you destroy the civilization. Civilization is always a generation away from collapsing. It is a fragile thing, and you cannot allow social engineers, especially if they have perfidious intent, to have any control over that, have any control at all over society. And they don't realise things like Barbie, which I have seen. All of that, well, firstly, Barbie is absolutely riddled with Kabbalistic overtones. I mean, riddled with it. It was totally jaw-dropping for me. But you've got all these idiotic Gen Z types going in there thinking it's a movie about feminism. And it's not. Not at all. Again, it's within the beginning of the movie, women rule everything, right? So it's a matriarchy. And by the end of the movie, the Kens take over in the middle of the movie, or the males, and everything's going to pot, of course, right? Again, just does not make sense. And then by the end of the movie, instead of finding equilibrium between the genders or the sexes, we go back to the matriarchy, right? Which, to be honest, isn't a matriarchy. The way that the quote Barbies or the females are acting in that movie, it's not womanly. So, for example, there's a pregnant Barbie that they all, make they have a grimace at, right? They make an icky face at. I mean, that's the one thing that differentiates. It's the one function that differentiates men from women. Now, of course, there's hormonal and even energetic differences, but that's the one observable function that differentiates the male and the female. And of course, it's a total utopia, right? Where they're supposedly all women, but none of them act womanly, none of them act maternally. It's all about me, me, me. In essence, through the entire movie, again, barring the Kabbalistic overtones, we're just talking about what the general masses would take from that movie. It is, in essence, a call to perpetual adolescence. That's what it is. And, I mean, you're even seeing women break up with their boyfriends and that. I mean, funnily enough, that vocalist broke up with her boyfriend after seeing that movie twice in the cinema. I mean, this is the effect of propaganda on gullible individuals that have been dumbed down, right? That are, their minds just are not functioning. To be honest, it's got to the point now, for example, and I remember Alan Watt bringing up this fact, and it's so true. For example, if a fox heads back to its den, its burrow, or, wherever foxes dwell, and, it sleeps there, and then when it wakes up, there's been a massive storm, and its entire environment has thus radically changed. The fox will either wait in place, or it will be extremely cautious, right? Because it's in a new environment now, right? An environment that's been heavily altered. So it's not as confident, and it doesn't understand that new environment. So it cautiously adapts, right? What do we see with the modern human species, right? The ones that have been inculcated with a chronic sense of gullibility. Well, what do we see? When everything changes extremely rapidly now, people just go along with the flow. They don't care. So, the 2020 crisis was a fairly poignant example of that, where everything changed overnight and everyone just quickly adapted to it. And people make this false statement, and people have this misconception that, well, if you don't adapt, I mean, that's sort of anti-evolutionary, right? If you're easily adaptable. No, if you're easily adaptable, you're going to find yourself entrapped, right? Because adaptability, if you are easily adaptable, it means you're reactive, right? As opposed to, say, the fox, which is cautiously adaptable, right? Which has cautious adaptability, meaning that it moves with a certain degree of trepidation. It is hyper alert at the new environment, which is, you would not see that in the modern human species who are easily adaptable. And it has an inherent understanding that its life is fragile. The modern human species does not have that notion. They don't think their life or the civilization in general is fragile, right? They have become the similitude of the dodo, right? The dodo adapted fairly easily to the novel presence of the hunters based on its previous behaviours, right? Because of the lack of predation within its habitus, right? So, I mean, we are the similitude of the dodo at this point. It's so evident. And what these individuals don't understand, the vocalist and the bassist, is that everything they're doing, that everything that they have been conditioned to do, though they believe they're doing it off their own backs and that they're unique little snowflakes, of course, you turn up the heat, a snowflake will melt, is that what they're sowing right now, societally, just with their actions, is their own demise, really, and is the demise of their entire lineage, which of course they're not going to have children, so there is that. Again, they've been conditioned into that. They're going to be old enough to see the horrors which at this present moment would be totally unimaginable to them, but they will see it. If you have a large population of the young women not wanting to have children, get ready for the culture to drastically change, right? And furthermore as well, so all the freedoms that they have, all this sort of liberal, wishy-washy, all manner of rights. I can't name them all here, this is going up to YouTube, but all the various novel rights that we have nowadays, right? This sort of liberal machine of human rights, right? Quote, quote, human rights. That's all going to go. You can kiss that goodbye, because what tends to happen in terms of historical precedent, when a civilization takes its last gasp of air, which we're in the process of doing right now, of course it's been artificially induced, and it usually is, even throughout history, by a certain cabal, right? You're going to see a totally intolerant, and they're already making that a reality right now with the sort of influx of characters that they're bringing in. You're going to see an intolerant and totally brutish culture take over. Brutish, right? I'm being very conservative with that word. When I say brutish, I mean barbaric, right? It's going to be savage. And your culture is going to be rapidly overturned, because at that point it will be dead. I mean, it really is already dead. It's going to be rapidly overturned. It'll either happen this generation or the next one. But if you're in your 20s right now, even in your early 30s, You're going to be old enough to see this. And I'm telling you, it's totally unimaginable, the horrors that you're going to witness. I would say look at the late Bronze Age collapse. It'd be something similar to that, right? You had the same issues then. Now, of course, the late Bronze Age collapse was a collapse of the entire Middle East. And even parts of Greece, Mycenae and what have you, Crete, Cyprus, these areas. The Minoan civilization, for example. Well, let's take the Minoans, for example. They had an extremely liberal culture. One could say it was partially a matriarchy. And from what we can glean from the art and such, they were very open sexually, should we say, which is funnily enough what we see with Rome when it started to collapse and be Christianized. Again, same thing, an intolerant and powerful cult or group or ideology or foreign contingent takes over. So the Minoans, they were one of the first to be totally swept aside. I mean, their civilization, their culture was already dead at that point, to be honest with you. But they were totally swept aside. I mean, the collapse was so bad that even after the late Bronze Age collapse, the Minoan civilization actually was largely forgotten, right? And even before that, they came under political and even cultural domination by the mainland Mycenaean Greeks, who were situated in and around the Peloponnese, between Argos and Sparta to the south. But they were a mercantilistic people, of course, given their geographic situation. But there was loads of other places where what was said was people were just sitting around all day in the late Bronze Age collapse. They were just making pottery, right? They were loads of ceramics. It was a huge trade, the ceramic trade. But what it tells you is that if they were doing that all day, of course that took them away from their families, so it was a sort of wage slavery. However, what it tells you, if they were doing that all day, and this was before coinage, the advent of coinage, that it means if they had to create ceramics all day to pay for, their survival, their upkeep, their familial upkeep, then it tells you that there was inflation, right? That they had to make a lot of these ceramics every day just to survive. So it tells you there was a type of false economy set up. Of course, it wasn't as we in the modern world understand a monetary system, but it means that there was an oversupply of certain goods that the artisan class or the working class, even the middle class, though they wouldn't have had those distinctions then, it would have been the sort of artisans, even the small business owners, their products would have been inflated. That probably acted, as we see with the modern monetary system, as a type of financial, economic, and thus political control of these lower classes by the rich, nobility, the priest class, and the higher mercantile and the higher merchant class as well, which is what we have right now, right? So you had a breakdown of the family unit. If you're slaving at your job day in, day out, and you have very little time to spend with your children, to spend with your wife, in probability terms, you have a higher chance of the family breaking down, of divorce, and even familial separation. Human beings are not meant to be away from their families for the majority of the day. It's totally unnatural, and it leads to unhappiness, right? We are family-driven beings. If you're away from your family for the majority of the day, that's a system that, to be honest, is unsustainable, right? And the system that they desire now, this sort of hyper-atomization, that's also a system that's unsustainable. You can have all the technological and surveillance systems you like, but eventually that system's going to crack at the seams because it's unnatural. Anything that goes against nature can't be negentropic, meaning it can't be eternal, right? It can't be a negative feedback loop. By negative feedback, I mean it just goes round and round and round and round, right? The instance of resistance actually is negated, and obviously it keeps on going, right? Like a circular wheel. The motion it keeps on progressing. You can't have that within nature. Nature has a fail-safe, right? It's hardwired into our minds. That's why they desire to control our minds, right? But you can't break it. Digressing. That inversion of the male and the female, that the female, the new feminine, is to become masculine, right? Which isn't attractive to the opposite sex. Their characteristics, the way they carry themselves, right? Their intrinsic behaviour is almost a caricature of a male, right? So for example, they're extremely sarcastic, the two of them. Now, I've seen that with a lot of modern women, right? That have came out of universities primarily. They're extremely sarcastic. The males are extremely emotional, right? Very emasculated. They're very intellectually flimsy as well. They have no principles. No principles whatsoever. And I don't mean you have to fanatically adhere to a principle like an ideology, but what I mean is they have no standards. That everything is relative to their identity. I guess that exists as well with the sort of masculinized women too. But yeah, so anyway, I'll continue on. I stated to the vocalist, I said, I wish you all the best. You're a brilliant singer. You have a bright future ahead of you. But obviously I can't stand for that. And then she stated, regarding that, stated, why did you do 2 songs of this supposed transphobe then? You were so, if you hate him so much, if there's no allegedly about it. Well, the thing is, I wasn't. I just wasn't sure how to express my feelings, as I didn't feel safe to do so. Right? Now again, this is total manipulation, using words. I didn't feel safe to do so, implying that somehow the producer or me threatened her safety in some way, that we were somehow villainous, right? This is total manipulation. These types of women are going to end up lonely. I mean, they talk about it as well, these two, that they're happy raising cats, not raising children. I mean, once their market value, when they hit about 30, 35, somewhere around that age, and they haven't got a family, they haven't got a long-term boyfriend who's willing to put up with their crap, I mean, they're going to live extremely lonely lives, right? Unfulfilled lives. And of course that will entrench them more within their ideology. It's a vicious cycle. This is how religions and ideologies bring into the fore these members, right, which they victimize subtly. But they don't do it directly, of course. It's the victims themselves that wholeheartedly internalize that ideology and reap the consequences of it. And a lot of these victims are impressionable, gullible, and they don't understand until obviously they've got nothing left, well, much later on in their life. And they have nothing else but the ideology at that point. I mean, it's similar, and we'll get into what the Catholic Church did, but it's very similar to 1984's Anti-Sex League. I mean, it's progressing to that point. The Catholic Church did this with monasteries and the intellectual class, as we see being done with the woke, the academic institutions and the intellectual class, turning them woke. So in the medieval era, or the Dark Ages, the intellectual class who could read, write, who produced all manner of books and knowledge, that was all primarily done within monasteries, right? Because the Catholic Church firstly could monopolise all information there, and they could control the intellectual ideologically through Catholicism, right? Having them totally and inescapably ideologically captured. And everything they would write about intellectually, or otherwise even theologically, would be through the lens of the ideology, which in that case was Catholicism. It's the same with the woke crowd. So all intellectuals coming out of these academic institutions, which have become the new cult centres, and the professor is, but a euphemism now for priest. The priest has become that this woke ideology is like the Catholicism of the monastic orders, that these intellectuals are controlled through the ideological lens of wokeism. Everything they write about is done through the ideological lens of wokeism, and thus the system can control the intellectual and intellectual discourse in that manner as well. Of course, Catholicism too had censorship and the vilification and blacklisting of the dissident, right? Or the divergent thinker. We have the same thing now with this, postmodern Western system, right? So it's the same thing. So she stated, "I didn't feel safe to express my feelings then. After we did," what she means by after we did, she's being very vague there. She means after the bassist came in, coincidentally, of course, I did feel very secure, right? But unfortunately, that security has been completely shattered. Can you see how she's weaponizing language here? This is a pretty poor manipulator, right? But I mean, she's had practice at this. Obviously, she's manipulated her boyfriend, who, talking to him, he sounded like a battered husband or something. Very timid, the way he was speaking. And when she broke up with him and then got back together with him, she was stating, it was all his fault, and she only got back together with him, she remarked, because he stated that, yes, he does have some problems and he'll work on it, and that, the worst course of action with a woman like this, worst course of action. And then some of the problems that she stated that he had was that he was low energy. Now, this guy's working 2 jobs, to my knowledge. He's a mechanic and he does something else as well on the weekends. And he's funding her, right? He's funding the house that they live in. And she's living there rent-free. Therefore, if he's the main breadwinner, why would she be so ungrateful and say it's, well, that's a problem, you have to be higher energy, So it's all about her. She's constantly seeking validation, which is what you see with narcissists. Constantly seeking validation, constantly seeking a sort of response from people on her. And she has a certain degree of self-importance. By low energy, she really means that she's not getting enough attention. It really is toxic, these types of personalities and archetypes that social media and education, higher education really, is producing within people. It's producing societally. And it's not conducive to the sustainability of the civilization. She stated as well, yes, I also don't understand the racial aspect, right? Again, because I believe she thinks white people can't be racially abused. It's bewildering. This is this sort of intersectional myth. This is all intersectionalism, by the way. So you see when she brought up the gender issue, well, that is intersectional to race, right? According to them, which isn't, right? But in their dogma, their mythology, it is, right? Again, within their dogma, their mythology as well, white people, quote, quote, white people, can't be racially abused as well. Also, this issue is less about race and religion and more about gender. I mean, obviously, as you can see, she's a bit dense, right? She's a bit of a dolt. She cannot understand that is exactly my point, right? Why is she bringing that up? You know, she's not bringing up the fact that the basis brought attention to my race or my complexion, to be honest. This is what she states next. As you seem to be fine with sexism as long as it's not towards men. When have I have never stated that. I stated, as I've read out in my response previously, any sexist insults, demeaning or verbal abuse to anyone in the band is not allowed. It's not permitted. And remember, this is a woman that I've literally paid for everything within the band. I even put money towards helping her with her speeding or parking ticket, rather. So, if I'm a sexist, why would I be attempting to help them all financially? These are things that, when the woke crowd gets caught out red-handed, being utterly hypocritical, they then project onto their enemies, their ideological enemies, all of their iniquities, right? And you're going to see that both of them did that, right? Both of them did that. And I didn't really message them at all. I just ejected the bassist from the band. She then sent me 2 or 3 messages that I didn't respond to, basically projecting onto me. We'll get to that later. And then the vocalist also, as you can see here, she's projecting, right? It's anything to justify their hatred. That's what it is. It's a justification of their hatred. So then they have to dehumanize you by projecting all their iniquities onto you, almost like a spiritual cleansing, which is what you see a lot of narcissists do, right? It's to try and bypass the moral conscience that they may have, right? So they don't feel the guilt. So they don't have to engage in self-reflection. It's a toxic archetype. It's a toxic personality trait. This is the thing you're dealing with. I mean, you've had this for generations. I mean, humans have always acted in their own interests, right? But when you have a society and individuals within that society that are pathologically narcissistic, pathologically manipulative, pathologically unable to self-reflect, understand where they've went wrong, because they believe themselves to be a quote-quote protected characteristic, and the other individual may not be. He may be part of the heretical or hated class. Then you get a society that is literally in a tug of war against itself. I mean, that's not a society that has longevity at its heart. I mean, these individuals as well. I would hate to see them in the next 20 years what their lives are going to be like, they won't be good. I can assure you. If they don't shake off this ideology, this ideological ensnarement. I mean, what happens to a narcissist when all of the characteristics that they possessed visually, when all of that wears off, when all of their friends get families themselves, stop hanging about with them? I mean, what happens to the narcissist? They've got nothing at that point. What ends up occurring is that they live lonely lives, and yes, they do raise cats, but it's not a happy life. I can assure you. I mean, the society itself and all of the media-driven propaganda is conditioning people, and it's specifically women, but of course it's the same with men. They're conditioning the youth into lives of absolute misery, leading to dead-end jobs and leading nowhere except unhappiness. Digressing back to the vocalist's comments to me, is you seem to be fine with sexism as long as it's not towards men. If you ever have anything like that, never dignify things like that with a response. And in fact, to be honest with you, if you ever find yourself within a relationship with a person like this, be it a friendship, professional, or, romantic, don't dignify anything they say with a response. Get the hell away from them. In essence, ostracize them from your social sphere, right? I mean, they're vampiric, they're totally toxic. So yeah, that was the end of that. I then ejected the bassist. This is what I said. Hi to the bassist, I hope you're well. I was deeply shocked tonight at the straight white male comments. Members of the band cannot be racially or sexistly demeaned. I have zero tolerance for that. I really appreciate you jamming with us, but I will have to unfortunately let you go. I wish you all the best for the future, and it was a sincere pleasure to jam with you. So, fairly cordial, right? The bassist then responded to me with this. I think you misunderstood that remark, as I wasn't demeaning you at all, but rather pointing out that offensive comments about minorities. Now again, all individuals are minorities, right? Again, she has a group mentality, she has groupthink. Don't have the same effect on you as they do to the groups in question, right? Now, she's literally grouping people together because of shared characteristics that she's perceiving, right? So it's this idea, it's very similar to misgendering, because the problem individuals have with that is you are forcibly grouping people together based on your perceived characteristics of them, to then imply that they, in a generalized manner, all act in this manner, or they cannot be affected by this said injustice, or they cannot be affected by this said social issue. So it's racism, right? It's racism. It's sexism. It's discrimination. It's a form of bigotry, because you're, in essence, stealing away that person's individuality, that person's right to individually express themselves, which is what I thought the whole woke crowd were about. They were all about protecting and strengthening the individual and the individual's right to expression. So which is it? Are we to be lumped in with the group, and thus to have no individual expression, no capacity for individual expression, while we wear our racial, gender and sexual uniform, which lumps us in with a certain intersectional group? Or B, do we actually have the right of individual expression, which can only be defined by the individual having the right to be able to express themselves out with the confines of his perceived category or his perceived group? So which is it? Which is it? Really, to answer their question for them, it's an ideology based on power and the redistribution thereof. Thus, it's whatever works in the moment for them to thus demean their enemy, who has a certain as she stated there, a certain collection of characteristics that are deemed by the religion or woke ideology as sinful, right? So it's the idea of the original sin. Because I was born a certain way, I have the original sin. Thus, I shouldn't have a voice. I shouldn't be able to express myself. And then I sent nothing back to that. And then she stated, I have to say, I'm incredibly disappointed, not only by how unprofessionally all of this was handled. Now again, you're going to see she's just projecting onto me all of the flaws she just exhibited through that entire situation, but also by your ignorance and complete hypocrisy, right? My ignorance and complete hypocrisy, because I don't want to dehumanize someone, right? Because they have a difference of opinion, that I don't want to treat them with disdain because we have a diametric opposition on certain policies or certain social issues, which, by the way, in 100 years won't matter because, well, firstly, people like her within her ideology don't have children, right? So if they don't have children, how is their ideology going to continue? It is a weaponized, self-defeating ideology. It's a product of psychological warfare to defeat a civilizational foe, right? And it's been pushed by an oppositional contingent, should we say, within this society. So I would have expected better from someone I would have classed as a good friend, right? Now, remember, I did a quarter of her essay, her 4th year psychology essay, right? She doesn't mind when the white straight males are helping her, but in any other setting, we are evil, we lack empathy and such. Of course, we don't lack intelligence or money. She doesn't mind using that. So, and I'm supposedly I'm the hypocrite, right? I mean, this is what you get from these types of manipulators, and this is what it creates, as I stated. That is what religions seek to produce within their membership base, be it prospective members or what have you. They create that archetype of the self-righteous narcissist, right? Because the self-righteous narcissist, which is they're also a control freak, they're predatorial. So everything they do will be to blacklist, character assassinate the opposition, to create ideological conformity to the hierarchical group and to its tenets universally. You can't even share a point of contention on a single tenet of the dogma, of the ideology, or you're ostracized, ousted, right? You're blacklisted. So there you go. That's the state of not just really modern Western women, modern Western progressive women, of course. You know, I hate using that term progressive because it's the total opposite, right? I mean, they talk about hypocrisy. I mean, the iniquity itself shows within their own terminology, right? Within their own arguments. Their arguments are hypocritical, naturally. And anyone with a semblance of intelligence can, find the inherent flaws within them, of which those flaws are innumerable within their ideological dogma, within their positions, which they're not really their positions. They've been inculcated in them, conditioned into them, right? It's a dogmatic fantasy that's born within the modern day churches of academia, right? By the professor, which is actually the priest. And they've merely substituted the vicar's collar for the professor's bow tie, right? That's all they've done. It's the same. They get up on the pulpit. You have the lectures, which are essentially the same as sermons. And they speak from the ideological book, the dogmatic book of wokeism, Alright. Of course, as I've stated in other videos, that also exists within the awake crowd, right? That same type of ideology. And it's going to fracture society, as you saw there. You know, it causes division in people. Causes division, makes them opinionated, that they can't even see another's humanity. They just see the ideas that they subscribe to for whatever reason, right? You're not that person, so you've got to sort of empathize with them. People have had vastly different upbringings to you. They're not going to have the same opinions as you on any given issue. In a democracy, if it is a democracy, which obviously it is not, but let's assume it is, for the sake of this argument, and it's officially touted as so, you have to have a divergence of opinion. You cannot have a homogeneity within the opinion of the populace, or you're going to have not a democracy, but a despotism. And of course, as you can see, they're totally intolerant. Totally intolerant. But supposedly, and of course, because I have a difference of opinion to her ideology that she's been brainwashed with, I'm ignorant. No, ideology equates to ignorance. Religious dogmatism equates to ignorance. Cult-like mentality and division based upon another coven, a difference of opinion, is ignorant, right? She has no knowledge of herself, thus she can't empathise with anyone else, which she was implicitly stating I couldn't empathise with people based on my congenital characteristics, which itself is ignorant. And of course she's attempting to defend minorities, but then she's attacking a minority, stating that I have no capacity for empathy with another group because I have certain congenital characteristics that she just so happens, her and her ideology, that she subscribes to through coercion and other such means, and her intrinsic impressionability and her intrinsic gullibility that she believes are evil, these congenital characteristics, right? I mean, that is total hypocrisy. But again, these people project everything that they are. And furthermore, they suffer from what really can be described as ideological totalism. Either you are fully on board or you're against them. It's total black and white thinking. They project everything that they are onto their ideological opponents, right? It's almost a way to cleanse themselves of the guilt that they project all of their iniquities onto the other person. You know what I mean? So there you go. That's the state of the music industry. It's the state of the academic populace. I mean, a supposed intellectual, a fourth-year psychology student, and she's asking technically a construction labourer to write a quarter of her psychology essay for her and to provide her all the inductive problems with the artificial neural network system, or the structure of it, really. So there you go. A totally inverted society. Everything about it is inverted. None of it makes sense. And everyone, as you can see, they're in complete denial of the flaws of it, of their ideology, and of the society that has externalized, that has been spawned from that ideology, or the society that's been hijacked by that ideology. So there you go. That's the state of the West currently. I do apologise for the length of this, and I went on tangents. There was just so much to unpack with this that I sort of had to go on these tangents. It totally baffled me, and I've never seen anyone. She was so indignant. She was so angry, passive-aggressive. She didn't pay for the band practice either. She just walked straight out. She didn't say bye to me. She didn't say anything. She didn't talk when she was in the car. Her head was just down in her phone. Yeah, total insanity. Total insanity. You know, I would expect that from someone who was 12. I acted like that when I was 12, that sort of opinionated notion that I can control how other people think and they have to think like me or I hate them. I mean, total intellectual adolescence. And she's 22. She's been through 4 years of supposed psychology, right? I mean, you would think in psychology, as I'm interested in it myself, that you would self-reflect, you would learn how to self-reflect, right? You would learn the value of self-reflection. You would learn the value of understanding your internal biases, right? You would understand and how that affects your thought, right? The initial thought and how it modulates it, how your mind can become very quickly tribalistic, and how that affects and modulates or regulates the thought. You think she would understand and look into all of these things and cogitate upon it all, but she doesn't. Amazing. So she's learned nothing. I sort of knew that from writing that essay with her. Now, I mean, the 2,000 word essay, I mean, it wasn't a lot, but the problem is she hadn't went over the study within the lectures, she stated to me. As you can sort of infer from that statement, she's only really good at regurgitating, memorising, regurgitating. When she's met with novel ideas, unexpected studies or unexpected information, she has no way really to process it. And she wasn't very good at the inductive problems, coming up with inductive problems as well. It's funny, she probably subscribes wholeheartedly to critical theory, yet she has no critical mind or critical thinking skills herself. Ironically, that seems to be what critical theory is seeking to engender within the individuals who subscribe to it. I'll leave it there, but I do apologise for the length of this video. Honestly, these people are just so insane. There's just so much to unpack that I had to make this type of video, you know, and I hope you can follow it. I do apologise.